So first off, I want your just straight up opinion before we get into facts or statistics or anything like that. Are cuts good at the top level of the sport?
Yes.
Okay, now why?
I mean, there's reasons that they're implemented. Like obviously the PGA is like is the example, for cuts in golf. And the reason the PGA, and we looked this up a bit and kind of looked into it, because like you just kind of like, I grew up knowing that there was cuts in like professional ball golf, so like I just kind of accepted it. But like there is reasoning. They implement the cut after the first 2 rounds in a 4-round tournament, and it's to basically lighten the field so there's more flexibility. They can have the players play in twosomes instead of threesomes, which disc golf that would translate a bit differently. But
yeah, so disc golf they couldn't do.
They're
twosomes.
lightening the groups, less waiting in between shots. They're also allowing players since the course isn't so packed, they can let players sleep in a bit. You don't have to have as many early tee times, and you can also have your leading players. You can really be selective with the time they're teeing off and playing in that prime afternoon slot. You can have them, that be more selective. So that is the reasons for a cut. I think in disc golf, those are all great reasons. But I think in disc golf, there's an even better reason to have them, and that's because right now there's no qualifying process to play on the Pro Tour. So this gets irrelevant players out of the field before the last couple days because there's no point in them being there.
Interesting. So the biggest argument I've seen against this,
or relevant players, I mean, good players can get cut too. That's just part of the game.
I think the biggest argument that I've seen against this is basically that it's going to discourage people from playing on the Pro Tour. That lower half of the field, right. Why are they going to want to show up? And they are the ones that donate to the purse. Now, before we get into a lot of this, I do want to mention that, and I want to get your opinion on this a little bit too. Personally, I don't think that FPO is ready for cuts in disc golf.
Field's not big.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the field needs time to grow. I do think that MPO is getting to the point that we can at least consider it,
right,
and talk through it and see kind of, are we there? But I do want to at least address the fact of the matter that we would be missing out. I think local pros would still show up because it's your local tournament. Right. You're still going to pay even though you might only be playing 2 rounds, but you would kind of miss out on those players that are kind of barely scraping by on tour, but they're on tour right now. I could see a lot of those players quitting simply because of the fact that now, if I'm not cashing, I think that one thing is where the cut line would be, but if I'm not cashing, essentially, I might not only get to play 2 rounds.
There's definitely a line to walk in the sport where, like, we want the sport to be, I think the sport needs to be more cutthroat because it's going to motivate players to rise up the ranks. And what could happen is you have these players that would probably be sitting around the cut line who really aren't let's say your cut line players, like the guys that are average, like they can make cuts, but they aren't really doing anything. Let's say they're not really practicing a lot. They're kind of just sitting there. And let's say they start practicing because they're like, oh, we got to be able to make cuts. And they realize they can get a lot better. It could really motivate those players.
That's assuming that those players aren't working hard right now.
I'm just saying that could be something that happens. Like we could see.
I think that's a select few because I think there's some people that are peaking just below the cut line.
Well, yeah, I completely agree with that. I'm just saying that's just possible. Like that's one of the reasons I think disc golf needs to become more cutthroat is to motivate players that are just kind of sitting. And a lot of these players are like guys that are sitting in like the 10 to 15 to 10 to 20 slot that are kind of just sitting there.
Well, they'd still be in the cut.
Yeah, but they could miss cuts.
That's also true.
Those guys that are like names that could miss cuts, that would be detrimental.
The biggest question that the Pro Tour has to answer before even thinking about implementing this is how exactly does this benefit the tour and help grow the sport? Like, what exactly is this doing to accomplish both of those things? Now, to me, I think the biggest thing would be the faster paced rounds that would help with the live coverage. Right. And it would allow people to go to threesomes, which would help with the faster paced rounds. That would change up, our current way we perceive disc golf and watch disc golf in, foursomes. That's just what disc golf is. But cutting the field would allow it to go to threesomes, which would allow it to be faster. And it would also cut kind of the dead weight, if you want to call it that, of the lower half of the field that might be causing some of these backups at, say, a Northwoods Gold type of a situation that we got into at Ledgestone. So it would remove some of that. But, one question is, are those benefits worth the repercussions of losing? Let's just say, in my opinion, I think it would be like around 20% of the field wouldn't show up if there was a cut.
Well, that's
So
the thing. Like
in a tournament that could be 20 to 30 players is the benefit of faster tee time or faster rounds, playing in threesomes, less backups, whatever else it could bring. Being a more prestigious tour, if you want to call it that, adding legitimacy, is all of that worth losing 20 to 30 players?
Yeah, and it is true that they will lose players because, like, obviously on the PGA Tour, like implementing cuts, that's not going to affect players because there's such a massive, like, ball golf is so much bigger that like there are an infinite amount of really talented guys ready to step into those slots.
Yeah,
ball or disc golf, because our pool of talent isn't there yet. Now it's really starting to boom and it's going to be getting there. But it cuts not there. Players, it's pretty easy to assume that there's going to be less players in the field. So then the only question, I don't think that does anything as far as like spectating or like following the tournament, because eyes aren't on those guys anyways. The eyes are on the top pros. So it only matters as far as money. That's what it comes down to. And I know you have the details, and what we've kind of decided is it's not going to make a difference.
Yeah. So, I asked the question of like how, in turn, like obviously how does it help the tour, but also how does it hurt the tour?
Right.
The number one argument I saw in response to Brody's tweet specifically was the purse. Because, those players who would be cut from the cut line are typically the ones you see as donators.
Right.
So I was like, well, is that actually true? Do those players actually make up enough of the purse that cutting them would hurt the players who are cashing?
Mm-hmm.
So let's look at it. Idlewild had 132 players in the MPO field. Again, we're not looking at FPO because I don't think they're not worth, that's the bad word. I don't think that they are ready for the cut, so it's not worth looking into is how I was going to word that. Since they're not ready for a cut, I'm not going to break down their field. MPO, though, 132 player field. So with 20% assumed loss, that would be 26 players at Idlewild. Which, with a $250 entry fee, that's $6,500 reduction in the MPO purse. I don't think the added cash would change. Do you? Losing those players at the cut? Because I think the added cash is coming in for the top players anyways.
Right, yeah.
So that would keep the added cash to MPO at $12,800. So the purse would basically change from $45,800 to $39,300. So without the cut, I took what the payout would be divided by the amount of players paid out, and the average person that made money at that tournament made $864. So on average, it paid out, I think it was 53 players. When you break that down, on average, it was $865. If you lose 20% of the field, the average payout actually goes up to $913.95, which was actually pretty surprising to me. So losing 20% of the field actually made the players who were cashing, who actually showed up and ended up in the top half of the field, more money. So obviously I was like, how the heck does that make sense? And how it makes sense is that the added cash goes farther now.
Right.
Because the amount you were paying out went from 53 players down to, I believe it was about 43 players.
Right. If you calculate it after the cut.
No, I left it at 40%, the PDGA standard.
Right. But if you're calculating that 40% from after the cut.
Correct.
So that's where it
no,
comes
not
in.
after the cut. The cut line would be around that.
Oh, you're saying after you take away the players that
you take away the players who are leaving because of the cut.
Right. What if you calculated after the cut line?
Well, that's not a thing. I don't think we're ready for that. But based on 26 players leaving the field, the same 40% cashing, which would lower to about, I think it was 43, it was somewhere in that range, basically from 53 to 43, the added cash can go farther.
Right, yeah.
So you lose their entry fees, but in losing their entry fees, you also don't have to pay out as many places, which means the added cash can actually go farther.
Yeah.
I wanted to see what first place was going to be, but Idlewild seems to do their own pay scale. They don't use the PDGAs, so it was really hard to calculate because they gave last place less money and first place more money, which is awesome. But it made it hard for me to do that math, so I wasn't able to see the direct correlation to what first place was going to end up receiving. Because that's what I wanted to see is like, is this actually increasing first place? But based on the average going up, it obviously would have had to increase what first place was getting as well.
Yeah.
So once I hear that, because I'm going to be honest with you, I was for a cut on the Pro Tour, simply because I thought it would benefit the tour. It would benefit the legitimacy. It would add that little bit more of like a competitive spirit where you can watch the top, but you can also watch the cut line. But my biggest question mark was that money part of, well, is this hurting the purse? Like, is it really going to be worth it? Because disc golf doesn't have outside money yet.
Yeah.
So we're relying on the players to add into that purse. So that was always a big withdrawal for me, was like, well, can we really afford to lose, let's say even 30%, 20 to 30% of the field over this? How much is that hurting? And now that I see it's not hurting, I'm having a hard time finding cons to this, other than if you look at it on a player level of this specific player might not play in the Pro Tour anymore.
Yeah.
Which, that's not to say he's not going to tour anymore, because I think there's still national tours, A tiers, and local tournaments that you can make a living on until you're good enough to consistently cash on the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
So I think this is a way that kind of implements, not that tour card per se.
It's kind of like the same idea, though. It's encouraging guys to stay off of the
Pro Tour until you're ready,
until they can actually make cuts.
Yeah, because that was another thing. Is I saw a tweet where it said that this idea of a cut was elitist thinking that turned disc golf exclusive.
It's not exclusive, okay. That whole like elitist mindset, and people say like, well, that's what ball golf. They're elitist. Ball golf is elitist in the sense that getting into the sport is expensive and it's a country club thing. That's what makes ball golf elitist. But you can't say that being a top player in disc golf is elitist and exclusive, because they've earned that right.
Anyone
through
can get
skill.
there.
Anybody could get there.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like they had some kind of privilege. Like, I mean, they earned it. They worked hard and they got there. So anybody could work their way up to that point.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is I don't think a cut is necessarily exclusive, because there's no rules as to who made the cut other than your score and your talent.
Just because we know, they think that because like they know who the established players are right now, so they're like, well, we know who's going to be in that cut the whole time. Well, 10 years from now, it's anybody's ball game.
Yeah,
so
it's
like,
already turning into anybody's ball game.
That's what I'm saying. Like that who those players that are in the making the cuts is going to be completely different.
Well, here's my thing, right? Is if you're a player, like if I'm going to a Pro Tour event, at my skill level, I would legitimately, and I could be crazy for this, I would legitimately believe I have a chance of making the cut. So the cut wouldn't scare me. It would give me a goal.
Right.
If you're a player and you don't think you have a legitimate chance of making the cut, you're just kind of going there for the experience anyways. So realistically, like if you're going and you're on tour and you think you don't have a chance of making the cut, then realistically you can't afford to be on tour.
If you're doing that, you're a tourist, not a tour player, basically.
Yeah, I mean, then you can't, like, because legitimately then, like, how are you surviving right now?
Yeah.
If you're going week in and week out and you're like, well, if there was a cut, I don't know if I could even, it wouldn't make sense for me. Like, are you really relying on rounds 3 and 4 to get you somehow into the cash line?
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
exactly. You're probably out of it by then.
Yeah. So that, to me,
use those extra days you just got to look for another event or something.
Or another job. The 20 or 30 people that we would lose, to me, is the people, honestly, like me, who I'm not going, like, if I'm going to go out and play like a Ledgestone or whatever, I'm going for just the experience, the pure experience.
Yeah.
I'm going to play open because I'm hoping I'm playing with some cool guys. But I'm just going out for the experience. I might have a chance at cashing, but I'm not guaranteeing it. I'm not thinking about it. So,
right.
But as soon as I lose 2 days of playing, then my question is, do I really want to drive 12 hours to only play 2 rounds? My answer would probably be no.
Right.
So you would lose players like me. But again, I think that players like me would only make up like 20% of the field. Mm-hmm. Because I think that the local pros, that whole scenario changes if all of a sudden this is in my backyard at Bedford. Because now I'm like, well, it's 30 minutes. I might get to play around with Paul or Calvin or whoever round 1, and what if it's my local course, what if I pop off and I make the cut? I think that whole idea changes. So that's why I don't actually think this would hurt the field as much as players think it would right now.
I think it just makes it I think it makes for more exciting storylines too.
I just
being able to see guys come from like guys you haven't heard of, and they make a cut, because now all of a sudden that player who nobody knows stands out a lot more in a cut field where it's like all the top guys and him.
Yeah, it's so like, wow.
Right.
So-and-so just made the cut. Not only to make a cut, he's 25th place.
Right. So if you make a cut now and you're kind of a nobody yet at this point, then like now you're going to get recognized.
Because it creates more storylines, which is the whole thing in disc golf is I think we need more storylines. That's when we were talking about a long time ago, drama in disc golf.
Yeah.
And we don't need to like go creating drama and gossiping, but there needs to be storylines, because that's just going to draw more people in and get you more invested. I think that's this type of stuff that MMA and UFC, I think that's the type of stuff that makes it so interesting is the stories leading up to the fight.
Yeah.
More so than the fight itself, because there are some fights that only last like
it makes
5 seconds.
Yeah, it makes the fight itself way more interesting.
And I think that would make the tournaments way more interesting. Is it's like, Justin Rozak has made this is his first year on tour, and he's made 3 of the 4 cuts. On the pro tour. Is this a new up and coming player? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or wow, name a random pro.
Andrew Marweed.
Wow, Andrew Marweed has missed 2 cuts in a row.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It creates more storylines beyond just Paul, Ricky, Eagle, Calvin, Chris, 1. You know what I mean? Because that's the biggest storyline right now.
Yeah.
Or if you have someone randomly break into the top 20, this just kind of adds another dimension to that in my eyes. And the more I think about it, the more I think that the advantages greatly outweigh the disadvantages of it. And especially once I did the research on the numbers side, I think that does it too. I wanted to come in here and play devil's advocate and debate with you. But the more I did it and the more I tried to come up with counter arguments, it was a never-ending snowball of like countering it, and then I was like, well, this is a super easy fix.
Yeah.
And on Brody's Twitter, the initial tweet, it was a poll, and it was 75% thought there should be cuts to 25% thought there shouldn't.